Welcome back, podcast fans. I'm your host, Annette Hines, and this is Parenting Impossible, the Special Needs Survival Podcast. Well, this is November, and it is the time every year that I kind of sink back into my grief. It is the time that I lost my daughter, Elizabeth. She passed on November 18th. It's been 11 years now, feels like yesterday. And um, I wanted to do something today for the podcast that does a reflection back, but also looking forward to the future. So you see, this is kind of a double whammy time of year because not only is this the remembrance of my daughter's passing, but it is also the holidays, the holiday time. And from Thanksgiving until the beginning of the year, January 1, New Year's Day, it's about 6 weeks of holiday, this and that, and celebrations and family. And it's tough. It's so tough still not to have her here for Thanksgiving, which was a truly favorite holiday of hers. Anytime we got together for a meal was a favorite time for Elizabeth. And, then we roll into Christmas, which is our winter holiday that we celebrate. And, straight into New Year's celebrations and a new year, new hope, new promise. So tough, but also still full of joy for so many reasons, right? So I wanted to do this reflection and think back almost like a palate cleanser to what I was experiencing at the time and how I felt. And then I'm going to give you some tips about how I survive the holidays and see if any of those are useful to you. Hope they will be. So, um, I've said this before on this podcast and in many talks that I've done, but Elizabeth was the love of my life. And I know that most people say that their husband or their partner is the love of their life. But for me, I know it was her. Elizabeth just totally got me. And we had this relationship that was so complete. And I got her. We spent a lot of time alone together. You know, as many of you will completely understand if you are the primary caregiver of someone with some profound disabilities. And even though she was so disabled, she was incredibly powerful in her way. And she was so good to me and so good for me. She was a good daughter. She taught me so much, and not in that stupid, goofy way that people like to say. She really did help me learn about life. For one thing, she brought me to this profession that I love so much. I get to meet so many brave people, warriors, so many people who are living life to the fullest. And I got to meet all these awesome people because of her, because she led me to this profession, to this life that I have. And I'm grateful. But after Elizabeth died, this parade of people that was always through our house in our life just suddenly stopped. Everything just stopped. The house was empty. A crew came in and took away uh, all her medical equipment, her medications, her hospital bed, everything. And it was so weird and surreal. Then I had to go to the funeral home and pick out a casket for my baby. Many of you will just shudder with the thought. It still gives me goosebumps and chills up my back to this day. I couldn't even think at the time. I don't really remember much about those few days, but I do remember thinking, like, what am I doing here? How can I be picking out a coffin? What am I supposed to even be asking for? How do I do this? All in all, it felt like the longest week of my life. We buried her on a Friday, 4 days after she passed. And it was raining outside because, November in Massachusetts, in New England, it was cold and rainy. And I remember waking up that morning and thinking that I just wanted it to rain forever. I never wanted the sun to shine again. How could it? Elizabeth was not here, and it shouldn't shine. It just felt right somehow, appropriate that it was bleak, cold, rainy. It was appropriate. And it was that kind of November cold that just gets into your bones and sits there and makes you hurt. You know, have you ever experienced that? Um, when we buried her, I thought I was ready. What a joke. I was so full of myself thinking about how smart I was, that I had made all these preparations, that I knew she was going to pass, that it was coming, and how I was going to be ready when the time came. Well, I wasn't ready. I'm still not ready 11 years later. My life keeps changing through this grief in ways that I can't always even express to you. And if you haven't experienced it, you might not know, but so many of you will know what I'm talking about. In the months after she died, and for a whole year after, I was like a dead person, numb, just walking around like a zombie. I still did my job. I connected with people, but it was all a charade. I struggled every morning just to get out of bed and go to work and do what I needed to do. I remember spending a lot of time that winter in my bed, just doing nothing, staring at the ceiling. Mark, my husband, he took up the slack. He did an amazing job of running interference and taking care of all of the little daily things in life that had to get done. I just couldn't get up. It was like my head, my arms, my legs would not work. They were all so heavy, just weighing me down. And it took so much energy just to lift myself up out of that bed, get my clothes on, and get out the door. In the meantime, people had stopped visiting. For them, it was all over. But for me, I was still living it. It was still so difficult. And grief is funny, it hits you, it hits people differently, and it hits you differently at different times. And it's not always about the crying. Um, it's it's not like you're in the same excruciating pain and agony that you were, but the grief is still there. It's deep. It lives with you and it impacts you in other ways, so many ways. It interferes with your memory, your ability to think and to process information. And it comes like the ocean in waves. It crashes over you and then it retreats for a while. And then it comes back again. And it's not predictable. I mean, yeah, I can say, okay, November 18th, I'm always sad around that time. Of course I am. It's PTSD. But there are so many other times that are unexpected and it just pops up. In the same way that waves from the ocean reshape the shoreline, my grief slowly reshaped my life and it transformed me. It was very gradual. Um, but just like with the ocean and the beach, it was very powerful. It is very powerful. And it is the process of becoming something else. At some point, almost a year after Elizabeth died, I was able to get my footing again, and the sand had come back, and the tide had gone out, and the waves weren't as strong. Whereas earlier I felt like I was drowning all the time, now the ocean was calm and I could catch my breath. And that feeling of catching my breath was such a relief, and so it was so needed, so necessary. And it came at the right time. I started to be able to think clearly again and to try to rediscover who I was in life and why was I doing what I was doing? But then that brought on new questions, and I started to ask myself, you know, if I wasn't Elizabeth's mom anymore, who was I? The relationship had defined me for so long, most of my adult life, actually. Um, and I was confused and lost about who I was now and who was I going to be. I had Elizabeth right after I graduated from law school. So it went school, married, baby, immediately. Um, and my whole identity as an adult was being Elizabeth's mom and Caroline's mom too. So without it, I was lost. I started to perform kind of an inventory of self. I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, and it was slow and gradual. Yes, I was an attorney, but did I still want to do this kind of work? Um, did I want to, do something else instead? Did I want to shut my practice down? I was also a wife. And I asked myself, did I still want to be married to Mark? I was really shook up and thinking about literally just trashing it all and starting over somewhere. Have you ever said to yourself, oh, if only I could just stop everything I'm doing and move to Costa Rica or Bora Bora or Portugal or whatever, your happy place is for you. But I want you to know that I know how harsh that sounds, and that, you know, you may want to judge me for that. I can take it. It's okay. It's honest, it's raw, and it's where I was at the time. I felt I just didn't have anything left, and I was acting on instinct. But I'm really glad that I didn't act on those impulses. Um, when it came to my marriage with Mark, I wasn't sure that I had anything left to give him. I was so drained. I felt so empty. And I still had another daughter that I was going to struggle to parent and to be present for. So I wondered and I worried. And I was struggling just to love Caroline. And that's the awful, awful truth about it. I was struggling to feel anything at the time. My family was there for me. But honestly, it was so painful for them too, so devastating and traumatic. And it made it hard for people to show up over the long term and sustain that type of support. The natural instinct is for people to turn away. It's ugly, the loss of a child. It's hard to comprehend, hard to fathom. And I was surprised at the number of people who didn't reach out or who didn't sustain their level of support. But I understand now, even though I didn't understand then, that people just had to go on with their lives. The world didn't stop when Elizabeth died. I wanted it to, but it didn't. At the time, again, I couldn't understand it. And it was hurtful, and I was angry when I wasn't numb. I couldn't wrap my head around living without Elizabeth in this world. We did have a remembrance for Elizabeth, a luncheon after the funeral, and so many people came. It was packed. There were lots of cards and gifts, and there were lots of in the moment support. But what am I trying to say to you? I know I'm fumbling a little bit. But the gifts, I didn't want them. And I don't mean to sound like I was not grateful for the support. And I know that people just don't know what to do, and they want to do something for you. They want you to know that they love you and that they're here for you. So they sent things like, things to put out in my yard, wind chimes, ornaments for Christmas, things like that. And I get it. I have only recently opened a number of those gifts 10 years later. At the 10-year mark, I decided that I was going to go through my pictures and my memory boxes and the wind chimes and the Christmas ornaments and the remembrances. And it's been a year and I'm still working on it, but that's how long it took me, 10 years to be able to get to that point. It's funny. It wasn't until spring of 2015, after Elizabeth passed, so a year and a half later, that I started to come alive again. And one of the things that really helped me was joining a group that was happening as a combo event with Dana-Farber Cancer Institute here in Boston, as well as Boston Children's Hospital. The social worker and the nurse practitioner that ran the program that Elizabeth was in, the palliative care program, reached out to me. They had been all along. I just wasn't really receptive, but they didn't stop trying. And it just was the right time for me. And it was a group that was all about families that had lost their children to illness, critical illness, which was the place I needed to be to get support. I tried a traditional grief group, and it was, people had passed from all different things, car accidents, suicide, overdoses, and it just wasn't the same. I have a friend who lost a child to an overdose, and they also belong to a group that's just of parents whose children have lost their battle with addiction. And I completely get and understand the need to just be with people who get you and who get the experiences that you've been through. It is meaningful in a lot of ways. At the point that I started this grief group, I was still very, very pissed off. I went from being numb to being very, very angry. There was a certain value in my feeling pissed off. It made me happy in a way because it was a step in the right direction to feeling something, anything. And at least when I was pissed off, I wasn't numb anymore. So when this invitation to this grief group arrived, it was the right time and the right place for me. I was probably the angriest person in the group. I had the roughest edges, and the other parents really, though, touched me and softened me up, and I got to reunite with some people, the hospital people that I had lost when Elizabeth was no longer with us. They were a big part of my life. And that made me happy. So to see the nurse practitioner and the social worker was just a breath of fresh air. It brought me back to a connection with Elizabeth again. And then, of course, there was Mark. He went to the group with me. He was able to listen, but also for him, it was the first time that he was able to actually talk too. He didn't talk as much as I did, but he was the newcomer to the situation. We hadn't been married more than 3 weeks when Elizabeth died. So it was a tough situation for him to walk into. He calls himself the best supporting actor in my life, which is not true, but I completely understand why he feels that way and why he speaks about it that way. He never felt like he was able to claim this tragedy, this grief for himself, because he was so busy supporting me and he was only the stepdad. But in that group, he was finally heard and celebrated. And it was a full year and a half after Elizabeth died. I felt terrible about that, honestly. And when I think about it now, I still feel guilty that I wasn't able to ask him how he was doing. I'm ashamed at how self-centered I really was at that time. But at least in that group, I got to have a little window into what he was feeling and experiencing. And that's another thing that I'm grateful for. So, in that group, we got to make this little bottle of sand. And I think I've talked about this before. It was really interesting. Every week we added a different color that kind of represented how we were feeling. And in the end, we had this beautiful layered, bottle of sand, all these different colors, some of them kind of like merged into each other. And it was this whole, visual of the mess that was my life at that time. I still have that bottle of sand, as imperfect as it is. Um, and I keep going back to this seascape analogy because visually that's how I think of it. And so looking at all those layers of different colored sand, it just reminded me again that the sea is changing me. It's changing my shore, my sand. This process of transformation, I'm still going through it 11 years later. And heck yeah, I'm just going to say I'm proud of where I've come to. I've not only survived this tragedy, but I'm thriving because of it. And it's been hard fought and hard won. It maybe has taken me a little while to get into the groove of all this. But starting with that grief group, it was the first opportunity I had to really let go and to let it all out. And now I do. It's such an odd community. It's a group you never want to join. You never expect to be part of, but there you are. Thank God that this group was there for me at the time. It could have definitely gone another way. I will tell you, I had many dark thoughts at that time. And they understood. They wanted to listen. I didn't have that anywhere else. At least I didn't feel that I did. Healing doesn't come in a linear fashion. It is like shows up in patches. I've described it as puffs of smoke. You catch a piece of it and start to feel whole again, and then it evaporates away, like trying to touch a cloud. And it starts and stops. Eventually, the angry waves subside. No storm lasts forever. And that was the beginning of true healing for me. So what happened out of that was I started journaling. And some of my journal entries are things that I would never let anybody see because they were so ugly and raw. But there was a whole lot of stuff that came out of that that was good. and honest and real. And I looked at it and thought this could really be something. And that was the beginning of my book, Butterflies and Second Chances, that finally got published 3 years later. I was so happy to contribute that to the world. All I want is for Elizabeth to be remembered. And this brings me to my surviving and thriving during the holidays talk. So there are, a handful of techniques that I employ to not only get through the holidays every year, but to make sure that they are good and that I can get the most out of them. So first and foremost, I take out all of my remembrances and I look at the art projects and the little ornaments that Elizabeth made for me, and Caroline too. And I appreciate so much every teacher, nurse, therapist that worked with Elizabeth to give me every birthday card and ornament and every art project that she ever did. I am so grateful to have those things now. And at the time, I thought I appreciated them, but that is nothing in comparison to how I feel about them now. So that's my first tip, is try, looking at photos and thinking back to happier times. Pull out those cards, pull out those ornaments, pull out those wall hangings and napkins and everything that they made for you. The second thing is, we in our family, we celebrate with food. Good, bad, ugly, it's always about the food. That's what comes from being Italian. And so I make Elizabeth's favorite foods and I think about, all the things that she loved. And I remember her in that way by having ham at Easter and, her pizza nights and all her favorite things. My third tip is tell stories. We all want our loved ones to live on in us and with us. And even if you're not grieving, even if your person is still here with you, focusing on positive moments in life and remembrances can be so good, so healthy. Remember that trip. Remember that silly time that they were playing with the dog and the dog ate their sandwich or their pancake. Yeah, that happened to us. And talk about them and talk to them if they're still here with you. Every year, I would tell Caroline her birth story. It was such a lovely birth story. And I couldn't do that with Elizabeth because Elizabeth's birth story was full of trauma. But with Caroline, on her birthday every year, I would tell her the story of her birth. And it was something that we shared. And I loved telling her that. Okay. So here's number 4. And this may be harder for some than for others, but it always helps me to get out of my own head and to get out of my own self and sometimes self-destruction. And so I make a point to help other people during this time of year when I'm feeling very, very sad. I don't want to think about my sadness anymore. So what can I do? Can I pick up some things for the local food pantry? Can I help a neighbor who needs a little support? Can I, you know, serve a meal at a food pantry or at a shelter? Can I donate some clothes? Anything that makes you feel useful and contributing and part of your community. Being charitable and being supportive really, really helps me and helps so many people that I know. Okay, my last one is a tip. Maybe not necessarily a strategy, but maybe it will be for you. The holidays are full of stress for most of us. There's a million things to do. It's hard to sit in your feelings, and um, it's hard when everything seems joyful and happy, and so much of it is fake, by the way. But when you're looking at Instagram and you see that perfect pie and the beautiful turkey and everybody's beautifully decorated house for Christmas or Thanksgiving, it can be really debilitating, sometimes overwhelming, to feel like you are not measuring up. That, why am I so sad? This is such a happy time of year. So my tip to you is just say no. Say no if you need to. Skip that holiday party if you're not feeling it. Don't feel obligated to cook dinner for 20 people. Offer to help someone host it at their house instead, or just don't even go. If you can't face your relatives because they are, triggering you in any way, just say no. You can say no. Do what you can and don't do one bit more. Take care of yourself. These times are difficult. The waters are deep and maneuvering through it is tricky. So just know I have your back, and so many other people in your life do too. And the world is not going to stop if you say no to hosting Christmas Eve. Okay. I hope these tips help you to survive and thrive during the holidays. And thank you so much for letting me remember Elizabeth. You guys have been such amazing, loyal listeners and followers, and just fills my heart with joy. And in the spirit of this time of year, please send me a message in the comments and let me know, is there anything I can do for you? I'd love to help you if I can. Ask a question, ask me for a resource. Just check in and let me know if I can send some kind words your way. Thinking of all of you during this holiday season, and have a great day.